Hey Donna, welcome back to the second episode. We're going to be talking all things study permits, right? I know we did this a couple of times and we had a network outage, but that's fine. We'll take it from the top again.
Lots of study permit questions coming up. I love it.
So like I said, welcome back to this one. This is going to be an exciting episode. We're going to be diving into specifics on study permits. It's a follow-up from the previous dialogue that we had in the previous episode, which is more of a macro view on Canadian immigration as we know it. Specifically on study permits, we'll talk about sort of the abstract view on study permits, and then dive into certain specifics on it, right? So I'll kick things off with a very broad sort of question to you. Study permits in general, right? Who is it intended for? What is the scope of when a person is saying they want to apply for study permit? What is generally their pathway look like in Canada? Let's cover the macro sort of definition of study permits, please.
So you could come in as someone who just wants to do 5 months of short-term language courses. You do not need a study permit. Anytime you're doing studies, full-time academic studies in Canada as an international student for longer than 6 months, you require a study permit. You could file that application from inside Canada, depending on if you meet certain eligibility requirements, or if you do not, you have to file that application from outside Canada. But macro level, high level, you do need study permit anytime you're thinking of studies for longer than 6 months in Canada.
Gotcha. And what constitutes a study? Like, is it language courses, university, college, trade programs? Like, what constitutes as a study?
All of the above. So anything academically inclined, anything full-time where you are going towards a certificate, a degree, a diploma, all of those counts as study.
Is it fair to say that all the DLIs, if you come in here for more than 6 months, all the DLIs,
Institute.
designated learning institute, yes, and for the viewers, you can go up and search up DLIs or designated learning institutes. It'll point you to the Canadian website, which will give you a list of a whole bunch of institutes that exist in Canada, like Canada-wide. Is it fair to
I would
say?
also say Google, when you're Googling it, if you could Google DLICanada.ca. Anytime you have a question, you could add that little end note, Canada.ca, and it would give you a more specific answer.
Gotcha. Is it fair to say that all these DLIs require study permit more than 6 months if an applicant is applying, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Are there institutes outside of the DLI list that is provided by Canada.ca that students can apply for that doesn't require study permit? Is that possible?
You would not be able. You don't want to do that. You would need to be on the DLI list to be eligible.
What happens if it's not on the DLI list?
You're not eligible.
Got it. Okay, so you can essentially apply for those at that point. Okay, makes sense. Okay, so let's talk about. So you mentioned something pretty important in the first sentence that you responded with. There's two ways of educating yourself here in Canada, right? One is through a study permit program, which is more than 6 months, right? Rather, the program itself is more than 6 months, for which you have to get a study permit for. And the second pathway is, and correct me if I'm wrong here, come in here as a visitor if the intent is to apply, is to go to an institute that offers courses less than 6 months. Is that right?
Sure. Yeah. For example, you could just be someone who is on a summer break. You could be a student from Germany. You're on a summer break. You want to improve your English. So you would come to Canada, study for 5 months, do language courses and you do not need a study permit, and then you go back.
I want to touch upon the visitor stuff just very quickly,
Oh,
even
yeah.
though I know the intent is study permits, but just so the viewers are aware of it. So there's two types of visitor sort of visas here in Canada, right? You have the ETA, you got the TRV, right?
Depending on which country you're from, you could
Correct.
be issued either a TRV or an ETA, but they both have the same purpose. It's travel authorization that you use in combination with your passport.
Got it. Okay. So independent from which country you're coming in from, either you'll get a TRV or an ETA, right? And that's generally valid for less than 6 months, right? Is that fair?
The visa?
the visa?
No, not really. The visa could be valid. Usually ETAs are valid for years.
Okay.
And getting an ETA is very easy as well. You can just get it. It's an electronic travel authorization. You can get it at the border. As a Canadian, maybe certain countries have actually it doesn't matter to Canadians. Forget that part. Depending on you could just have an ETA is a lot easier to get. Visa you have to apply for a little bit more in advance. It's a little bit more planned, and yeah.
Got it. Okay. So your visitor visa can be of a certain length, more
Mm-hmm.
than 6 months perhaps, but what you can
2 years,
educate yourself on, it
one
can be
year.
for years,
Yeah.
but your education should be less than 6 months. Is that right?
If you do not want a study permit, yes, correct.
Got
You
it.
can
Okay.
have a
Yeah.
so you but your so that it's actually very interesting you bring that up. So just because you have a 2-year visa aditas or a 1-year visa, which is usually the length of time that you're given a visa for,
Right.
you cannot stay in the country for 1 year or 2 years. Your maximum length of time per visit into Canada would be capped at 6 months anyway, regardless of if you're doing
I
study or
see. Okay.
unless you know that you are going to need to stay in Canada for longer. For
Mhm.
example, you are a parent coming to take care of your daughter who is pregnant and you want to stay here for 8 months, right? You could apply for what we call a visitor record. Students can do this as well. For example, if they're in limbo, if they're waiting for say a decision on another application, they just don't know what they want to do yet. During that time they can continue to maintain status by applying for a visitor record, letting the government know, yes, it's going to be past 6 months, but will you give me a record to stay here for longer for XYZ reasons.
Got it. And does that happen at the initial phase of applying for a visitor visa, or can that happen when you come here?
You would apply for a visitor record if you're applying for one from inside Canada.
Got it. Okay. So that's essentially you're coming here as a visitor, and now you're applying for a visitor record to stay longer.
If you needed to, correct.
Got it. And okay, so that was important in the sense that from a study perspective, you can only stay here, regardless if you have an ETA or TRV. The max you can stay here is going to be 6 months, right?
Correct.
And within that 6 months, if you do want to go ahead and educate yourself for a program that is less than 6 months, right, cumulatively, then you can go ahead and do that. You don't need a study permit.
Yeah, correct.
Got it. Okay.
So, for example, I can't take a 2-year degree or 2-year diploma in increments of 6 months by
Yeah.
continuing to enter Canada. That's not allowed. But I could
Got
take
it.
6 months of language classes every time I come in every summer as an international student from another country to maybe do my master's in Canada and be at that level to do a master's in Canada because I've done this language study, right?
How would the institutes know if you're a visitor or you got a study permit? Because you apply for the university or college first and then you get your study permit, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I guess my question is, if you're coming in as a visitor, right, you do a
Mhm.
6 months course, you go back home and you do an online course with the same institute, how would, like, can't you do that?
Yeah, online courses are you could do 6 months in as like a maybe a module of a course, right? You could go back and you could do online modules for which you don't need a study permit. So so we have programs, for example, I'm aware of programs where it would be a business degree and it's a 4-year business degree, but out of the 4 years you would do 2 terms in Canada,
Okay.
right? To kind of a part-time, or not even part-time, it could be full-time, but less than 6 months. But your degree is ultimately from France, right? It's just an optional out of country study 6 months or out of country study 1 year that you're doing, where you're given that as credit for your total degree.
Okay, let me ask you the question differently. And this is, I mean, it's a bit of a sensitive topic, so I want to be very cautious in what I say here, right?
Hmm.
Let's just say there's a program, like a 2-year program, right?
Canada.
In Canada, right? It's a 2-year program in Canada. I'm coming in from Germany, right? For 6 months. I've taken a course in person as part of the 2-year degree in Canada. I don't have a study permit, right? The next course that I want to take as part of the Canadian Institute is an online specific course, and that happens. Like even when I educated myself, some of the courses are just purely online. That can also give you the credits for completing your degree here in Canada. So the next semester I want to take it online. So I go back home and I take that online. I do my final exams and stuff like that. I come back here again, do the next 6 months course. I can oscillate back and forth and essentially get a Canadian degree. Is that possible?
Sure, but you might not necessarily um, be eligible for what we call a postgraduate work permit because of the
Got
way
it.
that you did that. So if you did more than 50% of your studies online,
Yeah,
um, you wouldn't be eligible for a PGWP. So if you're
that's
attending,
very good.
if that's your intention, then that wouldn't work. But if you're just looking to get a degree, like get that education, sure.
Okay, makes sense. I did not know that. That's very interesting to me. Okay, so kind of coming back to the study permit side of things, for when people are applying here to get a study permit, is there an age cap limit to educating yourself here?
No, I believe the intention is to allow people to come and want to. I could be a professional, I could be a psychologist from Barcelona, who is only fluent in Spanish. And during my summers, I want to come and improve my language in Canada. I'm allowed to do that. There's no age restriction on that. If I want to, let's say, go to study and I'm applying for a study permit for a much lower level course, let's say a diploma in sales, right? Now the IRCC might go, why? Or if I really have an intention behind that, I would include what we call a statement of purpose, which
Okay.
is optional document that the applicant can include and should include in situations like what I mentioned to explain to the officer why they're doing what they're doing, and that could help their case. One more thing is that the institutions themselves may not necessarily give some applicants acceptance letters for programs, or the program requirement for admission itself might be that you had to have been out of your last program less than 4 years ago, less than 6 years ago, right? So the institution might have kind of caps on that.
Got it. So there's the institutional rules and regulations that kind of permit if you can study here or not, right? Just based on your work experience, just based on how long it has been since you've studied, right?
For
Things
certain
like that.
programs,
For
yeah, for
certain
certain
programs.
programs, it's like that. You could easily find other programs that do not have those restrictions, but most of them might.
Got it. And then you have the IRCC regulation, IRCC rules that the officer will also look at to essentially pragmatically see if your intent here is really to study or not.
Correct. Yeah. So great word, because it's called dual intent. All right. So you are allowed to have what we call dual intent, which is you can study and want to immigrate to Canada at some point, but you cannot have what may come up as singular intent, which is I only want to study. I only want to immigrate, but studies is just a means to an end.
Got it. So that's essentially the sensitivity that the officers look at, because that's always been my question, and I guess from an officer perspective on how do you know, right? Like at the end of the day, if I take a look at the students that are coming over here, most I'm not going to say all, most of them have an intent to essentially stay in Canada. It's to some element, right? Either they want to work or they want to tag along with that with PR, et cetera, et cetera. It's a pathway to do that. There are some of them that just want to come here and study, but that bucket of people who just want to come here and study is there, but it's significantly lower than that who essentially is using study permit as a pathway to get into your PGWP and your PR and all that stuff.
Yeah, I don't know if the numbers, I mean, I'm sure you could find the numbers on that. There are it's interesting when you're looking at, for example, we have our ILAC International College campus downtown is very diverse with lots of students, right? But there are many colleges, public colleges that you could go to that you might not necessarily see that diversity. I think a lot of the changes in policy have taken an axe to programs like language classes and private international colleges that used to bring in that diversity for Canada, right? So I think that's one of the sad things that's happened with these policy changes. because like you're saying, maybe that bucket was small. It's only gotten smaller, unfortunately.
Right.
But IRCC, it's like, when you spray pesticide and you're trying to kill the mosquitoes, but then you kill everything else, and
Right.
now your garden has no life, no butterflies, no bees, no nothing. You just, yes, you don't have mosquitoes anymore, or you have little. so
Right.
so that's the kind of sentiment that I related to. I'm like, oh, I wish they took a little bit more of a more surgical approach in doing this, because
Right.
you could have really made that, if it was a smaller bucket, like you're saying. I'm really kind of conscious about, was it a smaller bucket, was it not? In some provinces, yes, in some provinces, no. But I can tell you that overall, what this has done is kind of just flattened it out. And
Yeah.
but
And so there's two things I want to talk about there. So first thing I want to talk about, and you said this a while ago, was the intent, right, to come to Canada, right? Keep me honest over here, Donna, but when you're applying for a study permit, there is the LOA that the officer looks at, right? The LOA determines your start date and the end date for your program that you've already applied to, that you've gotten acceptance to, hence the LOA, right? The letter of acceptance. The officer looks at that as essentially gives you a stamp to say this is how long your study permit is going to be for, right? And that typically mimics that of the start end date of the letter of acceptance itself,
exactly.
right? In addition to that document, you as an applicant optionally can also provide what they call a statement of intent, right? And the statement of intent is your justification on what you want to do here in Canada. And that's the opportunity for you to describe what your vision is to come to Canada, what your hope is to essentially do in Canada. That's the place you can apply. You can mention your further studies, perhaps your intent to work,
Yeah.
perhaps, right? And based on that document is what the officer can also look at to influence their decision to provide you a bit of cushioning on your study permit window. Is that a fair statement?
Very fair. Yeah, so you can get that extra time, because the officer essentially understands what you're trying to do, but they're not solely looking at that statement of purpose in that
Yeah.
decision making. They're also looking at things like the LOA, and most importantly, Adi, I do have to say, they are looking at your passport expiry date. So
Gotcha.
your study permit can, or any document, any permit that you're issued, can actually never be issued until, and this is unfortunately a common reason for an extension, which you need to think about a lot earlier. Right, because your passport can only be issued until the date of expire. Excuse me, your permit can only be issued until the date of expiry of your passport. So if your passport is expiring next year, but I've submitted an application for a study permit with an LOA for 2 years, and I have a letter of intent that says my intentions are to do this diploma, then do a degree, I'm only going to get a study permit still for 1 year if I'm approved, right? Because of my passport. So that could be fine, but make sure that once you come in, you're immediately applying for that extension of the passport and then extension of your study permit as well.
Gotcha. And got it. Okay, so I mean, isn't the best practice then, Donna, is if your intent is to apply for a study permit in Canada, first get your passport renewed,
Yeah, plan in
right?
advance includes getting your passport in order. Yeah.
Renewed, right? Yeah, because I mean, you'll get the timeline that you need. Because typically, what a passport renewal is going to be like 5 years, 4, 5, maybe sometimes in some countries 10 years, right? Okay, that'll give you the ample time that you need to essentially do what you want in Canada, right? Okay, so you got the LOA from the institute. Assuming your passport expiry sort of checks out, that's just you as an applicant being proactive and getting your stuff done. Okay. You got the optional statement of intent that the student or the applicant can provide, sharing the intent of coming to Canada, which can also influence in providing a cushioning around your study permits, based on how the officer views your application, right? There's a third document that I think we were talking about earlier, which was the representative's statement. I don't know the official term on that one, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but so tell me about that. What's the intent of that? What is the benefit of that, as opposed to an applicant applying themselves?
Yeah, the authorized representative letter is what you're talking about,
Yeah.
and that's a required document that you would put in when you're completing the application on behalf of an applicant. So you are explaining to the IRCC officer that you are supporting this application for these reasons. These are the merits of the application. You're talking about maybe how the applicant presents themselves to you. You're highlighting all of this to the officer in addition to the statement of purpose as well. So you're pulling from the statement of purpose and the conversations that you've had with the applicant to support them in this application. I like the word that you used earlier. It's like a nudge, a little bit, because it doesn't influence the decision per
Yeah.
se. It's an added support document that can be helpful in explaining your intentions to the officer.
And that's essentially the license your perspective of your applicant, right? Like when you're essentially doing the work for the applicant in terms of submitting the documents and all that stuff to IRCC, and that's essentially a letter that you will provide giving your justification on why the applicant should pursue their studies over here. That's a fair statement, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Got it. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I look at that as more of a nudge to your application, and you rightly said that. The second thing I want to talk about before I get into the logistics of study permits are PALs, right? PALs
Mm-hmm.
super important. Can you? I mean, Donna, it's relatively newer. I think it's ironic. Not a lot of immigration firms actually. I was talking to one of the immigration advisors here in Canada, right, who has been in the field for about 35 years. I think study permits is one of many things that they do, right? But he didn't know what a PAL was. I had to explain to him what a PAL was. So there is a little bit of a reality, Donna, that we're kind of ahead of the curve in terms of understanding, and I think that's because we're well integrated with the IRCC kind of conversations and all that stuff. Specifically, you, right? So talk to me about PALs. What are PALs? Why is it important to a student? Talk to me about the logistics of that one.
Yeah, I'll give this person the benefit of the doubt and say maybe they didn't work with students a lot with their license, right? Maybe they were more working with anything else but students, and which is why you've been under the rock when it comes to PALs. Because if you do student immigration, you know that there's this thing called PALs that has been taking over our lives for the last year at least.
But it's relatively new, I think, right?
It
Like it's
is.
not.
It is.
Yeah. Okay.
It's been
Got it.
introduced. It's so PALs now are you could look at them at like tickets, right? Provincial attestation letters. So the federal government has gotten involved, saying, all right, we're going to start allocating a certain number to a certain number of provinces to even out the students that are coming into Canada, and then the provinces can decide which institutions they then give these provincial attestation letters out to, right? So it's yeah,
Okay.
it's the good news for applicants is that depending on the institution that you're going to, you don't have to worry about doing a separate application for a PAL. Once you're accepted in that institution, if you have committed to that institution, paid the deposit fees, the institution will give you that provincial attestation letter. So it doesn't impact the applicant's application and it doesn't make the application more cumbersome or more harder. It's an added document that the applicant has to remember to include if they want to successfully apply for that study permit
Got it. Okay. So
or even be eligible at this point. Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about the PALS sort of breakdown, right? So my understanding of the PALS, and I think the word you use is right. The way I look at it is tickets. The number of tickets is set by the federal government,
Correct.
right? And it's also fair for me to say that how many tickets each province and territory gets in Canada, also the cap on that number is also set by the federal government.
Correct.
At the provincial level, once they get, I don't know, 30,000 tickets or 40, 100,000, whatever the number is, right? The provincial government essentially provides these tickets to the essentially seats in many ways, right? To each of these different institutes. Is that fair? Okay.
Exactly.
That's an interesting concept, and I can see that. I can see how that's a very powerful tool to ensure student caps, essentially, right? Has that, so I mean, historically, there's been a bias of number of students going to one institute compared to the other. I'm assuming this
Or
is sort
one
of
province
streamlined that.
compared to the other.
One province to the other as well, right? Because at the provincial level, there was a bias. At the institutional level, under the province, also there was a bias, right? I'm assuming this is sort of the intent of this is not just to study a student cap, but it's also to flatten out, to kind of streamline the process of students that come in, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Okay, let me dive in a little bit deeper on that one. So if now all the institutes are getting very similar number of tickets across the province, right? And I'm going to stick to the provincial level over here. This getting the similar number of tickets across the province, that would mean it's more competitive for international students to come to Canada for an institute that is on high demand,
Yeah,
right?
totally. Exactly.
Um,
Yeah. So you have to plan in advance. You have to apply early enough. You have to have a strong statement of intent. You and even given all of that, you still might not get the admission that you want because of all these recent changes. The benefit would be more for domestic students. So there is the benefit. There is the pro and the
yeah,
con out of this. Yes.
yeah. I mean, okay. So from a revenue perspective, it impacts institutes quite a
Hmm.
bit because the finances are completely different when you're looking at a local student compared to an international student. I think it's fourfold, four or fivefold. Okay. Interesting, very interesting. Now okay, so on the provincial, on the PAL side of things, it's going to be competitive internationally for you to get into one of these hot schools, right? Like, that is already pretty competitive enough, right? Um, for folks that are local here in Canada, it opens up a lot more tickets for them, right? It opens up a lot more seats for them because the international, there's a cap on the number of students. Okay, so that means internally it's less competitive, externally it's even more competitive. That's essentially what the narrative I'm hearing here. Okay, so that's the PAL side of things. I think that's a very interesting concept. It makes sense in terms of the government's positioning on why put in PALs, why cap the students, why strategically distribute the immigration across different provinces and not lean towards bias on one or two, right? That typically happens here in Canada. Let's talk a little bit more about what you can do with the study permit, right? Now, if I'm an international applicant applying here for a study permit in Canada, I've got a spouse, I've got kids. Can I get them as part of the study permit program?
Very much so, depending on the program that you're applying for. So if you're coming in now, previously it used to be any study program, like even college program, you could bring in your spouse with you, right? We talked about this in episode number 1, but just diving into that a little bit further. If you're coming in as an international student now into a master's program or a PhD program, depending on some master's programs are not eligible, but most are, you would be able to get your spouse on a work permit. Your kids could also have study permits so that they could study while you are studying, and then your spouse could also work.
Got it. Okay, so what if is there a scenario where you can just get your spouse and kids in without your spouse having any kind of permits?
Your spouse can enter on just a TRV or ETA. Now, if they do that, like we
Six
talked
months
earlier
cap.
about, there would
Yeah,
be a 6-month entry limit, right? So they would
got
have to
it.
leave in 6 months. Now, they can stay on with you for longer than 6 months. Let's say I'm doing a college program and my spouse is not eligible now for a spousal open work permit because I'm only doing a college level program. My spouse doesn't have to leave in 6 months if I can successfully explain to the officer that my spouse understands the regulations. His intention is not necessarily not to work. His intention is to stay with me as a visitor by my
Mm-hmm.
side till I complete my 1 year, 2 year program,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'm eligible to apply for PGWP. He is not. This is how we're going to support ourselves because we have this much money in our bank accounts. So you could successfully file an application for visitor record and have your spouse stay with you for the duration of your studies,
Got it.
if they're not eligible for a spousal open work permit.
Gotcha. Okay, makes sense. Okay, so you can get your family over here. You just got to prepare in terms of how your spouse is going to be positioned here in Canada, right?
Mhm.
Work, study, visitor, etc. There are a few options. I guess preparation is the key, right? Okay, so the other question I had was work permits. Now, of course, when you're coming here to study, if you do your paperwork right, you can also get work permits to come to Canada, right? You can do your PGWP, which is a postgraduate work permit, and all that good stuff. My question to you, Donna, is if you strictly come in here with a study permit, not intend to work, just study permit. Now you come to Canada and you change your mind. You're like, hey, I want to work, right? Can you do that, or does that require a brand new application process for a work permit?
You want to, so the only kind of work that you're allowed to do when you're coming in as a student is 24 hours of work while you study. So part-time work while you study. Now, you don't need a separate permit to do this as long as you're following the conditions of your study permit. So your study permit remains valid and you're maintaining full-time studies, which is included in following the conditions of your study permit. You don't need a separate work permit to work. You can just work off campus 24 hours. If I am lucky enough to get a job on campus, right? I don't even have that 24-hour cap. I can work how many ever hours that my employer is giving me because I'm working on campus where I'm studying. If you want to work after you finish your studies, you can do program that is eligible for postgraduate work permit, which is now only public programs, public college, public university programs. If you complete that, depending on the length of time of study that you did, you will be getting a PGWP. So after you finish your studies, you can go ahead and do your post-graduation work permit. If you complete a college program that is in a private college, you do not get a PGWP, but you could work while you are studying. So you could do something like co-op programs, right? So co-op is an unfamiliar term to most international students. It's a fancy word for work while you study. So co-op is a great option for anyone who is international, trying to get their feet wet in the Canadian job market and does not have an idea on where to start, right? So it would be a really good idea for you. And this is my opinion, Adi, but here's the thing. I see a lot of students who come in saying, I want PGWP, I want to work in Canada. And then they go all out, they spend this money, they spend this time on a public education, they get the PGWP, and then they come back going, I can't find a job. Yeah. Right? So it's like, it's been 6 months and I can't find a job and I'm on PGWP. I think that is a lot of money and time wasted because now you have that golden ticket to work in Canada and you haven't prepared yourself enough. You haven't built that employer network to actually use your PGWP. If you pre-planned a little bit, let's say you started with someone like ILAC. ILAC has been in the market for over 28 years. A lot of our students get great co-ops. I've had students work for TTC, Chanel. These are where you do your co-ops. I'm a big fan of co-op myself. I can talk about my co-op story a little bit, but I don't think that it's helpful for you to get a PGWP without having gotten an idea of networking with employers and working kind of up the ranks, which you can do for almost half the price if you go to a private college with a co-op program. And you can always combine it. You can always do 2 years at a private college and then go 2 years at a public college and then ultimately graduate with both, right?
Like a pathway program.
And the public university degree, which is a great option, which often gets put under the rug or ignored. Students are not thinking long-term, they think short-term. So think long-term and you could really open yourself up a lot of doors and use your PGWP to its maximum potential.
Got it. So, okay. So there's a lot of good stuff that you just mentioned over there. As an outside-in person, let me give you my perspective on what you just mentioned, right? What you described to me is that study permits, you can do part-time study. You can do part-time work using a study permit, less than 24 hours a week.
You never do part-time study as an international student, but you are more than welcome to do part-time work.
Part-time work, yeah. So you have to do full-time study, but part-time work, you're eligible to do that using a study permit. If you want to do proper work permit where you essentially want to work full-time, or you want the option of doing co-ops, etc., right? To get your experience up in your line of work, and essentially you want to make a career based on the degree that you've acquired, which most, if not all, want to do. The work permits are sort of the ideal options, which gives you the flexibility of doing co-ops, internships, postgraduate work permits, essentially full-time role, right?
So if I'm applying to a program in Canada that has co-op,
Yeah,
I will get a co-op work permit with my study permit,
gotcha.
right?
Yeah,
That
okay,
means that I can work while I study, so I can
gotcha.
work my 24 hours that I'm
Yeah,
allowed to work without a co-op work permit. Plus, I can work whatever co-op hours that the university or college says I need to work to get my degree or diploma.
gotcha. Okay, so essentially there you have the flexibility doing part-time as well as your co-op. You're essentially racking up your experience. That's the benefit of that program, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let me ask you this. It's a little bit of a conversation that is a bit off topic, but I think it's important for me to understand this. When you get a study permit, do you get a Canadian tax ID?
You will get a SIN card. Yes, you get a
You will get a
temporary.
SIN card. Okay, so that's what you can use to essentially get your part-time work.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, I did not know that. Okay. Um, okay, that's very interesting to me. So it seems like the work. So you got private colleges, you got public colleges. There's a transition you can do between both, aligned with what your future goals lie. You've got work permits that is very flexible here when you come into Canada. You can do part-time work with your study permit if you want to properly get experience with full-time capacity of work. Then that's where your work permit comes in, also giving you the pathway to the co-ops and internships and all that stuff, right? Um, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Two things I want to talk about. You mentioned private and public programs, colleges rather, right? Can you, at a macro level, can you give me an insight into the different types of programs that students can apply to? And I mean at a very macro level.
At the different types of programs that students can apply to in Canada.
Yeah, not at the discipline level, not like engineering, arts, and stuff like that. What I mean is like language school is one
The
pathway,
institutions. I
right?
get you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so you can come in for primary education, you can come in for secondary education, you can come in for post-secondary education. Um,
Can you define each of them? What is a primary education?
Young, very young, right? So you're coming in like we have, for example, I like the summer camps for 7 to 17-year-olds. You do not need a study permit for this. It's because again, it would fall under short term. You're just coming to learn language during your summers, then you go back to your home country. You're getting immersed in this culture here, and the summer camps that we do are actually really cool. We go to UCLA campus, for example,
Mm-hmm.
while you're learning English, and the students get an idea of North American style of education, get learning language while they're doing that. We have Raptor summer camp, so there's some really cool programs for that 7 to 17-year-old group that you can do in Canada. Then for your high schoolers, you can come in to do high school in Canada. You could finish your high school, and then you could do high school in a private college, right? So you
Okay.
would have to like a and then you could go into a public college, or you could go into a private college again. There are private universities and public universities, and which one you go to really depends on what you want your career to look like, what are your the faculty maybe, what you can afford. So there's many reasons that you would choose going to one over the other, but yeah.
There's an interesting program that you mentioned to me, Donna, a few weeks ago. It was called the IEC programs, right?
International education. Oh, excuse me. No,
Experience.
Variance Canada. Sorry.
Correct. Yeah. Talk to me about that. That seems to be very, very unique. Why would one apply to that?
So, if you're lucky enough where your country has one of these agreements with Canada, you could be, and you meet the age requirements as well. Usually, there's an age requirement to this. You can come into Canada without the option of studying and just get work experience, right? So you're applying for a work permit, and you can come in and work for 1 year, 2 years, and then you go back to your home country. Or
Okay.
you realize, oh, I really like working in Canada. Maybe I also want to do a college program sometime.
Gotcha. So, okay, so that's mainly designed for work permits, essentially IECs, right? Essentially, it's
Yeah,
a, I mean,
international
the way I
experience.
look at it is a trade program. Like, I mean, that's what it sounds like to me,
Sure. Yeah.
right? Okay. Um, is there specific fields in Canada? So, I mean, you said it's only specific countries that have agreements with Canada on that one. I'm assuming most of the European, EU kind of
Mhm.
has agreement with it. Okay. Um, is there specific fields, disciplines of study that IEC focuses on?
No, it's just a work permit. It's an open work permit, so you can do what you want with that.
No, I guess my question is, if it's a work permit, is there specific disciplines that IEC focuses on? No?
Yeah.
Is there, I mean, I'm assuming given Canadian economy, there's going to be specific areas of work that they would want collaborations with international countries, right? Hence the collaboration with specific countries internationally.
Mhm.
I'm surprised that doesn't have a list of ideal sort of disciplines to focus on IEC. I didn't know it was a one size fits all.
Yeah, we can. I could look into that a little bit more for you, but I don't believe there is. No.
Interesting. Okay, I think that's something. Let's. I think that's an interesting conversation to have. Um, Now, in terms of you know, if I take a look at PGWP, right, it's a pretty hot topic. Like again, kind of
Mhm.
merging your work permit to sorry, your study permit to your work permit. Um, PGWP is that, and we'll talk about that in a separate episode in further detail, but just at a macro level. Um,
Very juicy topic. So yeah,
Very
we can.
juicy, right? I know that's gonna cover a wide gamut of things, but at a macro level, do you apply for PGWP when you are applying for a study permit if your intent, like I said, the statement of intent is to work in Canada after study, or
No. So your PGWP comes once you've finished everything. So once you prove to apply for PGWP, to be eligible to apply, you need to have the completion letter, meaning you've come
yeah,
to Canada,
okay,
you've done your studies successfully, and the
gotcha,
university or the college has said, Aditya Sriram, you have conferred this, this degree has been conferred upon you essentially. You could
got it,
take the document and then you could apply for your PGWP
got it, okay,
language
and
now. So that's the new rule that's also been put in. So before Adi, you used to be able to apply for PGWP, like I said, just with completion documents, study final transcript,
right,
application form, supporting documents, etc. The newest addition is now you also have to include an additional language test, a general IELTS or PTE or CELPIP, and that has to be put in with your application for PGWP to be eligible.
and I guess that's a benefit if you're coming here with you're doing a language study and all that stuff, you're kind of packaging up all that requirements for PGWP.
Yeah, you want to start strong by starting. If you're from an international, if you are from a country where you have not spoken English at all and now you're being thrown into it, it would be a great idea for you to really build your foundation with language first before you scaffold on top of that, and then you come back and you because you're going to again finish up with
Hmm.
proving that you have language abilities.
Two questions I have. One is on the language side of it. When you're saying
Mhm.
language ability, and you mentioned something important back then, which is culture of Canada, right? In terms of language, I'm assuming when you're saying language, and I think it's a fair assumption, is it's covering both English as well as French. Is that right?
It's a
Got it.
bonus. You can speak French. If you can speak both languages, it's a bonus. So if you can,
Got it.
you definitely want to look at English programs and French programs. Maybe your native language is closer to French, where it might be easier for you to pick up French than it might be for you to pick up English. Yeah.
So okay, if I take a look at study permits, right, at a high level, the way and correct me if I'm wrong here, Donna, it is. It seems to me like if I take a look at the people that are coming here to do study permit, their intent, most, if not, I'm going to say most again, most of them, they have an intent to be here in Canada for the long term, right? Which means generally to study permit, tag along that with work permits, with a work permit like a PGWP, and then that would be your pathway to getting PR and then finally a citizenship here in Canada. That's sort of the 4-step process. I mean, I'm making it very linear, but then it can get complicated, I'm sure. But if I take a look at it at a macro level, that's sort of the 4-step process. That's the general pathway I see. Is that fair?
It could be. That could be a bucket of people who are coming in. We see a great number of students for programs, international college, for example, that are just coming in to add a Canadian education to as a feather in their cap and then go back to their home countries and use
Yeah.
that for opportunities in their home countries, right? But there is the other bucket, like you're saying, who comes in and really sees, okay, I can make a living out of this, like I can do this in Canada and this is where I want to be now. So yeah, you could have you dual intention is totally is fine. There's no requirement that you have to only have intention to study. You can have the dual intention of maybe I want to immigrate to Canada at some point.
Right.
But if your intention is singular, if your intention is only to immigrate, but studies is a means to an end, that's a no-no.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's an important conversation to have. So let's dive in a little bit more deeper into that, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a study permit and you're coming here to Canada, you have dual intent, which is essentially to go down the path of PR and work PR and all that stuff, immigrate to Canada essentially. My question to you is how, okay, so let me take a step back. Does let's just take the happy path that you want to get a PR. Let's just focus on those people who want to get a PR, right? Is the How different is it to apply directly from a PR internationally compared to going down the path of a study permit and then going down the path of getting a work permit, PR, citizenship? How difficult are those two applications and the process of those applications for acceptance?
That's an interesting question because it's not about difficulty. It's about what fits your personal profile the best, right? Maybe you are someone who is so young that you just got out of high school, you just got out of college, you've never worked a day in your life, and you want to come to Canada to work. Might not be possible yet, right? You either need to get some work experience in your home country under your belt before you apply, or you can come to Canada to add to your bachelor's by doing a master's, and then successfully apply for PGWP, which leads to, after you getting work experience here in Canada, a PR, right? Like you said, the happy path. So it depends on how much time you have, how much money you have, what your current education is, what else you're willing to add to your education, how much work experience you have previously, what your age is, right? So there are all these factors, but most importantly, there's the factor of language, right? Language carries huge points. So immigration in Canada is equivalent to like taking a test, right? So you have to score high on the test, a certain grade on the test. And if you get that grade, if you meet that cutoff, then you are invited to apply for permanent residence. I'm talking about Federal Express Entry. That's one program, right? Now, the points for language, for speaking both English and French, is quite heavy. So you can get a lot of points by speaking both English and French. You can also just get a lot of points by speaking English really well, right? So I tell students and I tell clients a lot, if you're worried about, you're not improving your English score, why are you going and making it more complicated for yourself by now adding French as well? Pick one and excel on it first. Gotcha. Before you add another one, right? So it could be more strategic to do that.
Yeah, I think language is pretty important in the sense that, I mean, yeah, of course, there's language to come here and have a pathway here in Canada. But I think just, and you said there is a sizable chunk of folks that come here just to educate themselves on the language, right? And go back home just to make the progress that they need in their career path. And that happens very often. Like I've seen that happen, especially in the Middle East. I've seen that happen quite a bit, where they just want to send folks over for a year, polish up their language skills and go back and jump up the ladder because now you have the language to back it up, right? I've seen that happen pretty often. So the reason I asked you that question, Donna, it stems from a underlying sentiment that I think a lot of Canadians have. The question I asked you earlier was, how difficult is the application process for PR compared to that of study permit? I think your answer was spot on. The reason why I asked that question is because in Canada, especially, having conversations with several people, they think they think that a lot of the students that are coming in are using the study permit as a backdoor entry to get a PR, which is not necessarily the case.
I mean, a lot of them might be. We have to really, I would want to pull the numbers, but there could be those students. But I like to think that you have good actors and bad actors and everything. So there are your students who are just coming in to study.
But I mean, yeah, so I mean, that's the role of the IRCC officer to kind of vet out and all that stuff. But my point is, it doesn't seem like a backdoor entry. It just genuinely seems on your intent to do what you want to do. Because there is a pathway to come to PR to Canada just directly internationally, but you need to have a certain criteria. You need to contribute to the society in some capacity, have a decent background, work experience, and all that stuff to come here and contribute to society, right? By working and all that. You're not just coming here and, living off, nothing, right? Um, and there is the other pathway for students to come here, which is through a study permit program, which is to equip yourself to the Canadian standards of how it is to, to educate yourself, to work, to contribute to society after that. And that is the other pathway. My point is there's a sentiment out there, and I want to bust that sentiment essentially. There's a sentiment out there that if you're coming into study permit, that you're coming in because you kind of guaranteed a PR, which is not the case. Right,
Mm-hmm.
that is not there. There is a set of people that come here with the intent, and that's the dual intent that you're talking about. But there's a
Yeah.
proper process in place in there. It's not like, hey, I don't want to apply for a PR, so let me just kind of wiggle my way in by using a study permit and using that as an excuse to get the PR. Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I think the federal government is pretty smart in identifying characters like that. I don't think it's beyond our pay grade. So um, I want to share that sentiment because that is a conversation I'm seeing. I mean, even if you go online, there are so many people saying the
That's
same
very
thing.
fair. Yeah, I think that I would even say so. For example, when I do these seminars, sometimes I hear a kind of shock in the crowd when they go, "Wait a second, I don't need to study to apply for PR,"
Yeah,
and it goes, "No, you don't. If you meet the requirements, you don't have to
correct.
study, right? You could apply directly for PR." There have been times when I've had students who come and tell me, well, my agent promised me that if I get PGWP that I will get PR. Your agent shouldn't have promised you that because
Yeah.
there's no way that you could get PGWP with the guarantee of getting PR. That would just be unfair, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is fair. So, okay, so I wanted to share that sentiment out there because there's such a common, when I take a look at immigration, if I take a look at study permit immigration, you can just see so many sentiments of people kind of saying study permits have been abused. I mean, yeah, I get it. The IRCC has tightened things up now to kind of get their act together and all that stuff. They're doing the right things and they're kind of making the system a little bit more unbiased, which is the right direction. But study permits is not the only way to get a PR. I think that's what I wanted to share as part of this, right? So Donna, from your background as an RCIC immigration consultant, talk to me about the study permit changes in terms of compliance from last year to this year. What has changed apart from the numbers game and all that stuff? What has actually changed from a process perspective?
You are seeing, so they've removed, I think one of the biggest changes would be the student direct stream. So that used to bring in students from certain countries, India, China, on the SDS stream, the student direct stream, where they would be approved for a study permit in something like 20 days. Right. So that stream has been removed. So you are seeing a much more fairer application. Every country, every international student, there's no direct stream. You're applying under the same portal, the same application. It could be different processing times depending on which country you're from, but that's based on availability of like visa offices and things like that. Right.
Talk
So
to me, yeah.
yeah.
So tell me about the processing time because I mean, US has a crazy processing time, right? Like in terms of, okay, Canada's not that bad, right? Like, but okay, talk to me about the processing time. Processing times really. So what are the dependent factors of processing time? Let me start off with that.
It could be anything. So when we were having the elections, for example, the processing times were crazy. It was there was changeover in government, so you were seeing that lull in
Yeah.
applications not being processed quickly enough. Where we are at now is it's getting quicker and quicker. So
Hmm.
study permit applications as of yesterday, when I checked, from India now takes 4 weeks.
Hmm.
So it's quite quick, right? It was 5 weeks just about a week ago. It was 5 weeks announced for it. So you're seeing that decrease happening. So they are getting quicker. IRCC did a bunch of hiring. I know that they had published in the news not too long ago, saying they hired a whole bunch of people. So I think training those people and now putting them to work, essentially, you're seeing that reduction in application time. So a bunch of things can contribute to application times. Anytime there is a change in regulations, you also see the processing times go up. So you're kind of seeing panic, right? So people are doing those panic applications. So you see the numbers go up again. Right now, the PGWPs are taking a long time to be processed. But my take on it is it's essentially like a little bit of a gift that you're getting from the government. I know students don't see it this way, but if you've done everything right, wherein you have applied with all your eligibility intact for the PGWP, with a valid study permit, with language, with proof of having completion, the forms, the supporting documents, and now IRCC is taking 200 days to process it. You even get a document from IRCC that says, hey, you can legally work, right? And you can work full time. And that full time work counts towards points for permanent residence. So when I'm telling students this, I'm like, if you were eligible for a 1 year PGWP and now it's taking the government 200 plus days to do it, you're essentially almost getting a free year. Don't complain about it. Just take it and run with it.
Yeah.
So it can be beneficial depending on who you are. So yeah.
Does can the applicants? Okay, let me take a step back. When the applicants applying to a certain institute at a certain province, does that impact the? Does that also impact the processing time?
Yeah, could be.
Do
The
we have visibility into what are the different factors? We don't have that visibility
No,
essentially.
you don't know what the processing time is for every individual institution. Yeah, because they're processed, yeah, at a federal level.
Got it. But it is. Is it fair to say that it's not strictly based on your passport?
I
It's
would know. That's
multiple
an
factors,
interesting
right?
question. Yeah, don't know.
Don't know. Okay. Yeah, because I know they keep that kind of hush hush, but I think, but the good news is once you apply, rather, because when you go to the IRCC website, there is a processing time sort of guideline that is
It's
provided,
based
right?
on the number of available visa like backs, right? So
Got
there's
it.
certain number of processing offices. So depending on where you're from, I do like some countries, like to I guess some countries would have longer processing times,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, so
Depending.
I'm getting to the bottom of does the country you're applying from make is that the heavier reason why processing times are so different, or is it also based on your unique application itself, right? It
Oh,
seems it's both, right? And I guess it also depends on where you're going to in Canada, like which province you're going to. That also will play a role. I'm assuming,
potentially. That's it. That's an interesting add-on on that, but I can see why that
right?
could, yeah,
Um, okay,
because you might
so
just have lesser volume in a certain
yeah,
province.
because I'm thinking, I mean, if you go to Manitoba, for example, right?
At the same time, all applicants are submitting their application on one Canada.ca site. So every application is kind of coming in there. They're not filtering it out by province.
Interesting.
Or maybe they are, but at least when we're no, actually they do. When you're putting in the questions, you do say which province you want to
Province
go
you are
to.
from,
So
yeah,
the
right,
provincial attestation letter is there.
right.
So excuse me, yeah.
It could be interesting. I think that's something we can dive into a little bit more, maybe.
Yeah, we should.
Um, but okay, so switching. I mean, keeping in the same line of topic, but switching a question away here. So when an applicant is applying to a college or language school, wherever they're applying to, they get their LOA, their letter of acceptance, right?
Correct.
Now they have been accepted as so. The act. Keep me honest over here, Donna. When the institute sends out an LOA, right?
Hmm.
Is there a PAL that is reserved for the student?
Yeah, so once the student has accepted the offer letter and paid the deposit, ideally, in most situations, you would get the provincial attestation letter given to you by the institution.
Okay, so you've consumed a PAL when you have accepted an offer to an institute.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's only after that that you essentially
File
process
for
your paperwork through
yeah.
IRCC. Okay.
And that PAL
Uh,
is valid for 1 year.
got it. Okay. Now here is where my question strikes. If you've been accepted at the institutional level, right? There's a PAL that's reserved for you, right? You go and apply to IRCC. IRCC rejects you.
Hmm.
What are the common reasons for that?
The most common reason could be you don't know that the financial requirements have gone up now to 20,635, right? So you have to be able to show that amount on
Okay.
top of being able to pay your deposit and your fees and things like that. So finances could be number one. Number two is the biggest reason, the most kind of common letter of denial that we see is you don't have enough ties to your home country. So IRCC believes that your intention is singular. You only want to come here and study and get PR, and you don't actually want to do the program that you want to do because you don't have enough ties to your home country to say that you're going to go back.
Got it. Okay, so there are multiple.
Might be doable.
I mean, I think that's where the experience, like your experience, sort of comes in to say, okay, these are sort of the common best practices, kind of how to, do these forms and
Yeah.
stuff like that, right? Okay. It seems to me, I want to stick on this topic for a little bit of
Yeah.
time. It seems to me like, okay, so the federal government regulates the flow of PALs.
Yeah.
The PAL has been given out by the institutes blindsided if they're actually going to be coming here through compliance or not, right? Now, after you get the PAL that you sent out on, then the student goes to IRCC and they can either get accepted or rejected. But if they get rejected, this PAL is gone from the institute. It's not replaceable. So that's a student that's gone out of the finances of the institute. Okay, that's an interesting dynamic. That, to me, at a macro level, what that tells me is the federal government is saying, these are your tickets. You better know how to spend these tickets. If you don't, we're not going to give you an alternative. Right? Right?
Yeah.
Like that. That's what it. Okay.
Yeah. Very
Okay.
heavy-handed approach. Yeah.
Okay. So now there's a reason why I'm asking that question, because it seems to me like the natural progression of this would be for the institutes to get their act together to make sure that the PALs that they're giving out would ensure some level of confidence that they're going to get accepted.
Yeah, the institutions they don't want to waste your PALs, right? You want to give your PALs to your students who are going to essentially be good students.
But they don't know. But that's the point. They don't know. Right
Yeah.
now, they don't know, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of students are quickly getting their act together now and looking at more things than does this student have a pulse?
Yeah, I think, and I think that's manually done at this point in time in institutes, right? We'll talk about VisaBook, which is something we're building together to kind of address a lot of these concerns, both at the individual level as well as the institutional level. But if I take a look at this, what it seems to me like is federal government has sort of aggressively gone in and tightened stuff, and institutes have to adjust, right? Because now they have governed tickets that they can only give out, but then there's a sense of risk associated with giving out tickets to certain students that they don't know if the student is going to get accepted or not, because once the ticket has gone wasted, rejected by RCC, that ticket is gone.
Yeah.
Right.
I totally agree. I do want to talk about how the approach that the federal government has taken, Adi, is what a lot say is an axe, right? And what they should have taken is more of a surgical approach. And having seen many different international campuses, I agree with that, because one of the campuses, for example, that used to bring in the most diversity would be our private international colleges and our language schools, for example. Mm-hmm. Those students were really just coming to gain that extra feather on their cap that was international education or language, then go back and add back to their community. Yeah. All these rules have only put more restrictions on getting those kinds of students as well, right? So we were equating it to like you're trying to just kill mosquitoes, but then you're killing everything. You're killing bees and butterflies, and
Yeah.
that's not necessarily a good thing. So I think what I would like to see as we go through the years is maybe the government doing their homework as well and seeing, okay, maybe this kind of education
Hmm.
brings in what Canada needs, more diversity in their international student population versus this other kind.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah, that does make sense. I want to switch topics very quickly now to just the education in general, right? And I'm kind of going a little bit back and forth just because my thought process is a bit back and forth. But if I take a look at education here in Canada, um, why would one want to educate themselves in Canada as opposed to back home? Do you have an answer to that?
Could be research. I know Canada is very highly regarded for our institutions, our research institutions, a
Yeah.
certain kinds of study. Having been an international student myself in India, the Middle East, UK, I studied a little bit in the US as well. I believe that Canada has our faculty sometimes can be really well versed at what they're teaching, the institutions, the support that we get in terms of, like I said, research, psychology. When I did my psych major here, doing my thesis, I really loved that part of my education. So I think that could be a reason why students could choose Canada over another place. If we're looking at it from the immigration aspect of things, Canada, I believe, still remains one of the places that you could get your permanent residency the fastest after
Hmm.
completing your education. So that's another reason students may choose Canada. So that could be their dual intention as well. So it could be that.
You
Yeah.
know, the way I look at it is that there's a couple of ways I look at Canada from an education perspective, right? Is it the most perfect education in the world? Absolutely not, right? But are they good? I think they're pretty good, right? I'll give a perspective in a couple of ways, and this is my honest sort of perspective on it. I've been educated internationally as well, much like you, Donna. Um, I grew up in Dubai, as you know. I came here at a pretty young age, middle school sort of time, right? Um, Here, I think education up until I think the quality of education here kicks off after a certain grade. Let me put it that way, right?
I
Right. So I think
public education.
yeah, I think international like education back home. I think in certain up until a certain grade is much better, transparently, right? That also is true for Middle East. I personally have been educated in Middle East. I think their education system is pretty strong. They have the British curriculum, right?
Mhm.
But coming here after a certain level of education becomes super, super important from a career path, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think so. There's two things I'll break that down to. I think first is from a language perspective, Donna. I think you're spot on. I think the language exposure that you get over here is, first of all, Canada's a very friendly country, right? It's very welcoming. There's a reason why a lot of people come over here. It's not because it's the quickest to enter. It's because the quality is pretty good over here, right? In terms of education, the language courses are good here because a lot of people use that as an avenue to bump up their climb up the ladders back home. That's a very common practice. I've seen that a lot of times. The second thing I would say is just the quality of postgraduate education over here is phenomenal internationally. I would say, right? So many institutes, so many faculty members over here. I personally have a background in AI. I've done masters and PhD over here, albeit I didn't complete my PhD. But I've worked with the likes of the Nobel Prize winner Hinton. Right now,
Mhm.
he
Yes.
won the AI Nobel Prize, and he's considered the godfather of AI. I had the honor of working under his faculty, right, for a couple of years. You simply don't get that exposure internationally. Not that faculties internationally are not that great. I mean, I know when I was in Waterloo, we collaborated with faculties in IIT to make to publish journals and papers and stuff like that. But just the quality of education and the exposure to both the Canadian as well as the U.S. market is a
Mhm.
huge value prop to come here, right? I think the way I would summarize it is that you've got. I'm not going to say Canadian education is a perfect education. I think there is a certain element of education that's better internationally.
Mhm.
But I think the value add for Canada comes in at a certain time in your life to really prop up your skill. And I think you need to be smart in leveraging that to really grow your career path. Whether you want to work here or not doesn't really matter. But I think from a skill set perspective, I think it's super important.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point and makes complete sense. So when if I'm understanding you correct, you're saying for the education bit, do Canada, and for the working bit, if you want, go and do the US or something like that.
No, I
But
think Canada has great opportunities as well from a work. I think it really depends on what the work is, right?
okay.
Look, like, Canada is a very, I mean, especially in certain provinces, is very saturated, right? Like, everyone is, you know, you need to know where to go, which province to go to get a job.
Yeah.
Canada has a lot of jobs, right? If you are in the mining industry and stuff like that, Alberta, you'll get some good high paying jobs. I knew people who graduated right after the bachelor's degree that was making six figures, right, in Alberta, right? Cost of living is also lower than that of Ontario, at least back then it was, right?
Mhm.
So you got to make the smart decisions. Yes, you got see, my point is education in Canada is really good after a certain time. You need to be strategic and understand. And I think that's where, Donna, we were talking about companion programs, right?
Yeah.
What VisaBook can offer in terms of giving that pathway to students, not just from a compliance perspective, but also as a handholding to understand what the true intent of these applications are and provide them the guidance that they need, right?
Yeah.
Education in Canada here is really good after a certain point in time. You need to be strategic about that. And from a work perspective, my point being is, yes, you got US south of the border, yes, but Canada itself has a lot of work opportunities based on your background, first of all. But then you also have the top up. If you do want to go and work in the US, it's just south of the border. You have access to the market. It's going to be the same as what it is right now. I don't know, but at least me, I after when I graduated out of my master's program, I think my first job was Canadian. After that, everything was US based,
Hmm.
right? I had element of US exposure throughout my career, and the proximity to Canada makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
In terms of me doing that, my skill set also is background in AI, which is a very unique skill set to have, right? And that was, given my background, it made a lot of sense. So my point is, you got to be very strategic on that. There's a reason why people are coming to Canada. You need to truly understand your purpose, not just go through the permit and hope that you have a one intent of getting a PR,
Yeah. Um,
right?
I would state an unpopular opinion here. I mean, just based on what you're saying, I do believe so. I would maybe I graduated from university in Canada in 2015. I do believe that the quality of Canadian education has been watered down to a certain degree. Like Mark Miller said when he brought in these regulations, right? There are colleges posing above massage parlors and presenting themselves as Canadian education.
Hmm.
So that wasn't fair to the overall outlook of Canadian education. And I think that's why the government took such a heavy-handed approach in saying enough is enough,
Yeah.
right? But I do agree. Like we have my parents, they did an interesting experiment with my brother and myself. Like my brother went to private high school. I went to public high school. And they were like, okay, let's see who ends up where, right? So, and I think that, I don't know who's won yet. I'll have to get back to you
I
on
think
that.
both checked out
And
great, right?
sorry.
Both checked out great.
I don't know about that one, but I do think that it still gives me a very interesting, like, what did you get from your private high school that I didn't? And he went to
Right.
an all boys private high school, a great high school, and he still gets that network support, right? That alumni
Right.
support is still there to this day.
Got
So
it.
I think that's where and like you said, like private education is getting more and more something that a lot of parents are choosing in
Yeah.
Canada because they're
Yeah.
realizing I'm going to get that focus that I want for my child.
Correct.
And even as you go, and it used to be, maybe just in college or university, but now it's getting even younger and younger, high school, elementary school, right? So yeah, private might be the way to go eventually. But I'm always gonna fight to say, there's a little, you get a little bit of a chip on your shoulder, I guess, coming out of public school. Like
You
you have
know
to
it's
do a
it's
lot more
interesting.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, I also graduated from public high school, right? I frankly, I mean, I'm not the person to kind of make the judgment or rather a decision on which one is better, private or public, because frankly, I haven't been exposed to both. I've only been exposed to one. But I'm seeing the shift, right? Like even right now, I've got a daughter, right? I've got a young daughter. I'm sending her to private. I'm not sending her to public just because look, it's nothing wrong with public. It's just that personally, I'm more comfortable with private, right? And the reason for that is just because something as simple as teacher to student ratio, right? For someone that's young, 3-year-old, right? Like so, see, like, and I think private has been exploited when we were young, in my opinion, because I knew people who went to private that used to just, bump up their grade 11 and grade 12 marks to get into one of the universities, right?
Yeah,
That
I
was
asked my
common.
mom. She said no. I said, "Can I go do math in the school?" They said they'll give me a 96.
Yeah.
She's like, "No, you stay in public school, you get a 70, and you go where you go."
Yeah, and so I mean, there has been a certain level of exploitation of what private is, but I think that dynamic is changing right now, right? I think a lot of people are preferring private, and I think private is also. I mean, it also depends on which private. You got to look at the history of private schools, right? It's not like I don't want to name bomb any private schools over here, but some of these private schools are just a backdoor entry to essentially get you the marks that you need for the university, and you pay them big bucks, thousands of dollars to make that happen for weeks, right? I've seen so many people do that. So what they typically do is they'll be like, okay, yeah, I want a 96. I want a 96 on my physics score, physics or math or whatever, right? They do that, and they get into one of the top, university programs to know that, okay, the first year they had to repeat it because they, it happened. It happened personally to my friend circles as well
No,
when I was
no,
graduating.
believe me, I'm laughing because I know.
Right, exactly. But I think that dynamic has changed right now, and I think, my positioning on it was, did I find high school useful over here from public perspective? Not really. I don't think it was useful in my life, if I'm completely honest, just transparent for the viewers. High school over here, private, I think is a completely dynamic. I don't think you can really compare that to public. I think that's a fair statement, right? I think private is a little bit more private education in high school. I think can genuinely prepare you for what you can expect in university. I think that's the difference.
Yeah.
Public, I don't think really does that good of a job, because frankly, when I did public high school, I didn't really care about it. I only started really educating myself when I went to university, just because now they were teaching me stuff that I could learn, right?
Yeah, I was cruising in high school here based on what I learned from the Middle East, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So what I learned back in Middle East when I came in middle school, I was like two. So here's the problem that I had, and this is a personal experience I'm sharing. When I was in the Middle East, and I came here I think when I came in grade 8, transitioning into grade 9, what I learned in the Middle East when I was in grade 8 over there was, I think, grade 10 to 11 here in Canada. So I got
Mm-hmm.
really bored the first 3 years of my life, and that's horrible because it set the tone for me to get bored even in grade 12 when really things really mattered. And I was just, like I said, I was just cruising right by. And then when university hit, I'm like, oh, finally something you can educate yourself on,
Mm-hmm.
right? So look, there's a huge debate internally in Canada. We hear public or private and stuff like that. But for you international viewers that are coming here to Canada, you guys are likely, like, if you're going to university colleges and all in Canada, those are phenomenal. I don't think that can be compared to what they teach here in public school in terms of middle and high school, right? I think if you're going private high school,
Research, right, on where you're going before you go there. Look at Google reviews. Try and visit the
exactly.
place. Talk to. This is why it's important if you're working with someone that they have a presence here in Canada, so they can tell you, "Yeah, I've never heard of that college, so I'm not sure why you're going there," or the opposite. This is a great college. Yeah.
And what matters is what are people graduating out of those colleges doing?
Mm-hmm.
What is their pathway? I think those are important conversations to have. It's not just, hey, these are the top 5. Because look, I graduated out of a bachelor's program. It was not considered, I think, the top 5 bachelor programs in Canada, right? It's Ontario Tech University, by the way, right? It was not considered back then it was called UIT, but then I make the transition into Waterloo once I did my bachelor's, and my career path really changed. My
Yeah.
point is, you got to suit a program that fits you better, right? If you are good at what you're doing, you will make the pathway regardless of what ranking your university is. But of course, the ranking of universities matter if you're looking at alumni support. I think that's where the differentiator really comes in, right? So my point is, for those international folks that are coming here to Canada, I think my feedback, and Donna, let me know what your thoughts are. My feedback is the private high schools over here are really good. You cannot compare that with the public versions of those, high school, middle school stuff. Private high schools are good. Colleges, universities are really good.
Mm-hmm.
what you as applicants need to understand is what does your pathway look like in Canada, doing the research, understanding what these institutes are pumping out, where are the biases of jobs these institutes are pumping out. That will give you a good trajectory of if those institutes are a fair play for you. That's the ideal way of looking at it, as opposed to just doing it by a numbers game, in my opinion.
Totally. There are some institutions that will only hire from certain colleges or certain universities. There's some employers that would only hire from certain colleges, universities. And I used to think this was kind of unfair. I still think it's a little unfair because I believe it should be based on merit, right? What the applicant is like versus where the applicant is coming out of. I don't mind saying, like, when I was looking for a co-op and I applied for a co-op at CAMH as a psychology student doing a rehabilitation program, CAMH told me they won't take me because my college I was in Seneca College, York University, they wanted U of T or something to that extent. I was very upset, going, but I'm just as good as them. And I said, okay, fine. If you don't want me, I'm going to go to someone else that will take me. So I do think that it's unfortunate that some employers do that. I think but now, given how watered down it's gotten, and maybe it was getting to that level back then as well, who knows? But I think now they're doing it even more so. So it's a tough game.
Just one last thing I want to mention. We're going a little bit over, but it's very, it's interesting you say that. Typically, those kinds of decisions of I want to pick from one university comes from a manager who's probably alumni of that university. They probably have some time.
Oh, interesting. Okay, makes sense.
I don't think it's an HR policy because I don't think that's the right thing to do because you cannot create. Because I'll tell you why. Speaking from experience, you can be a 3.5 GPA coming out of one of I wouldn't say like one of the mediocre universities or colleges coming out of Canada, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you are dumber than a person coming out of Waterloo. I have seen many people coming out of Waterloo, and trust me, I've also taught at Waterloo, right? I know people who've got 3.8, 4.0 GPAs in Waterloo that I personally would not hire. Why? Because they are a typical 9 to 5 person. They're not creative enough. They know how to get their stuff done, but I cannot depend on them to essentially be creative in the line of work, right? So I think the applicant mentality really matters, right? I have personally stepped out of that to say that there is a bias towards one or two universities where only those universities and colleges pump out smart students. I don't think that narrative is true at all. I've seen so many people successful that are coming out of mid-tier colleges and even low-tier colleges and universities that are much better, much successful, much more articulate. And so I think long story short, I think I've seen those postings, by the way. I've seen a lot of postings saying, oh, only U of T candidate. It's probably one guy that just woke up in the morning and thought, oh, you know what, I want to go and support my alumni today, right? It's good, but then, there are much better candidates out there. I don't think you can generalize it just based on the degree that you hold. Right?
Yeah.
So that's sort of my feedback, and I've been in the field, so I can give that feedback, right? So, So Donna, I mean, we want to cover a wide spectrum of study permits, right? Now, for those viewers who are watching this, if there are topics that we haven't covered, feel free to kind of address that in the comments below, and we'll take that up in follow-up topics. One of the things I wanted to do was sort of a Q&A sessions based on the comments that we get, Donna. Really a communication directly from them to you through the avenue of using the comments. If you have any comments, please put them below. One of us, Donna or me, we will reply to those comments. And if it's an interesting enough topic that you want us to talk about, we can even address a complete video on that, right? So that's one thing I wanted to say. I hope we covered sort of the wide spectrum of topics on study permit. Donna, what do you think? Is it things that...
Yeah, I would love to deep dive in more on other things, maybe more detailed on study permit extensions or applying for a study permit from inside Canada, the eligibility criteria that you need to meet. So that could be future videos that we would love to do for you. If you're interested, do leave them in the comments below.
Awesome. I think that's great, Donna. Any closing comments?
Nothing. I think thank you for having me, and looking forward to chatting more in episode 3.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you